Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Here we talk about inner authority, the inner authority paradigm shift that I believe we are all a part of and experiencing in some way, shape, or form right now. And how to practice inner alchemy, how to expand our inner perception. And in this particular video, I wanted to talk about really applying inner authority and inner alchemy in chaotic times when we are experiencing antagonistic events in our personal life, in our immediate micro reality, and also applying that at the macro level as the world's more and more is revealed of what our outer reality really is, and how chaotic these times may be, how to use these same principles on the macro level with larger events so that we feel more empowered and able to take back our creative power in life and really use every single opportunity that is coming through our field in our quote-unquote outer reality and bring that back into the sphere of control. Bring that back to the self through an inner alchemy practice. And so on this inner authority journey, one of the first things that usually comes up that I wanted to send a reminder of, and I am going to share a personal experience from this week for me as well, because I had a big reminder of this. It's very easy to forget. And that is that our inner and our outer worlds are fused, right? They are one of the same. And the more that we start applying these principles and practicing this way in our lives, I don't need to convince you of that. You will experience that for yourself. So it just is. It just takes the practice and the awareness to start perceiving life that way, and the skills to start practicing this sort of inner alchemy, that you will experience this shift within yourself. So again, I want to talk about inner authority, the sphere of control, looking at it at the micro and the macro level, okay, and how to apply it in both situations. And the big reminder for me this week, especially, this is the gift of life. Every time that we forget, it gives us an event to remind us. And that is that inner authority does not make us right. It makes us responsible. Okay? Inner authority does not make us right. It makes us responsible for everything that is occurring around us. It's bringing that sphere of control all the way into the inner world. And when we do that, we feel much more empowered. Not only do we feel more empowered, but again, we will see that reality shift. Okay, so let's talk about the sphere of control and applying that sort of inner authority principle when something antagonistic is happening at the micro level in your personal life. Okay, something in the outer world, someone, some event, some situation is applying pressure and feels like an antagonistic force in some way in your life. So the first thing that we want to do is recognize that whenever this happens, there is a part of us that is allowing this dynamic, that is bringing this dynamic into our lives. Okay, and this isn't about blaming the self. This isn't about playing victim in any sort of way, or saying that we deserve, what is happening. There's no judgment, in my opinion, that is being applied. It's a sort of karmic law, if you want to say. And again, it's once we understand that the inner and the outer world are fused and we see it as an empowering way of developing self-awareness, we are less of a victim in these sorts of situations. So when you perceive something that's antagonistic that's happening outside of you, there is a reminder, okay? Inner authority does not make me right, it makes me responsible, which means I need to look at this. What in my energy, what fears, what doubts, what is being triggered that has created this opening and this tension and this opportunity for me to develop more self-awareness? Maybe I'm going to take an external action that might involve leaving a job, leaving, a relationship, a difficult conversation, changing where I live, right? These are all external changes that we can make because we have an event that seems antagonistic, and therefore we want to resolve it by changing the external. But if we do that first, we oftentimes miss the opportunity to do the inner release that is necessary so that this particular pattern does not repeat itself. Okay, so in my experience of this last week, where I had, I'm going through a lot of changes, my own shift in life, coming into new patterns, and of course my body was responding with a little bit of tension and stress because of this change, and because it was triggering something, an internal, an old memory of sorts that I didn't realize at the time was happening. And therefore, in my outer world, I was perceiving in relationship a boundary infringement. And I wanted to solve it externally. I wanted to assume that I was right? That what I was perceiving externally was accurate. And therefore, I needed to take external action. However, I forgot, right? As we do. And so again, this is the reminder, no matter how long, I've been doing this for 10 years very deliberately, but especially when we're going through big changes, we can forget. Inner authority doesn't make me right, it makes me responsible. Inner authority means that my subjective experience of something is important. It is important that I acknowledge and are truthful about our subjective experience, because there is something there. There's something that needs to be understood. But but our subjective experience does not mean that something is objectively true. Okay, we can't confuse those two things. The subjective experience is for us. Once we resolve the subjective experience, the objective reality becomes more clear, and we're able to more clearly understand what action needs to be taken. So for me, when this seemingly, boundary infringement issue came up, I was tempted to act externally, which of course doesn't work. It adds a distortion field on top of the resolving of an issue, because it's not entirely truthful. And so I practice inner alchemy, creative meditation, asking for guidance, asking to see truth no matter the cost to my own ego, which means that I have to acknowledge that something in me, in my own energy, invited something that looked like an antagonistic event. And therefore that part of it is my responsibility. And through that creative meditation and through that inner alchemy work, I was able to find that there was indeed something from my past, a wound around abandonment, that I was then projecting, that was creating a guilt of sorts for myself and projecting onto the other. And when that happens, I can't deal with this external event very clearly, right? Because it's like, the best way to describe it is that there's a confusion and a distortion field on top of an event. Something is not truthful. And once I recognized what part of my energy was allowing and creating this sort of seemingly antagonistic dynamic, once that was acknowledged, the energy clears, the objective reality that can then be dealt with, and whatever I need to release so that a pattern doesn't repeat, right? Or it at least can stay quiet for a little while. Because these things do tend to pop back up, but we get different layers, so this was a new layer of a wound that I was already familiar with, but I didn't recognize how it was impacting my relationship to work and my relationship to boundaries around work. And therefore, once I did that inner work, I was able to resolve in a much healthier way that was fair to both me and the other person. and could relieve them of the projection that I was throwing onto this particular dynamic. And so that sphere of influence, the empowerment, right, is that recognition that the inner and the outer world are fused. And that if I resolve this internally for myself, if I recognize what part of my unconscious, subconscious, right, my feminine energy and that subconscious part of the feminine energy that often has a lot of our shadowy self and wounds and all of our fears, right? So if I can address that and dissolve that then objective reality and clarity for next steps comes through. But until that work is done, it gets very messy and distorted. Okay, so that's on the micro level. I hope that makes sense. And the invitation on the micro level in your own personal life is that the next time that something seemingly antagonistic happens, go ahead and bring that sphere of influence all the way into the self. Inner authority does not make me right, it makes me responsible. And then we're going to go into deep self-inquiry, but through the subconscious, we want to alter those brain waves and be able to go deeper within ourselves, because it's not mental conscious work. It is deeper work that needs to be done. So it really needs to be explored through creative meditation, through, adjusting that brainwave. When you meditate and you do conscious breathing, you're changing your brainwave state. And so you want to ask these questions and do these explorations when you are altering your state of consciousness. It'll be very hard to see clearly and resolve from the conscious mind alone. Okay, so the invitation is always to remember that there is something internal. It doesn't make you a victim. It's not about blaming yourself. It's just how these laws work and how karma works. And the faster that we are at recognizing that and bringing that sphere of control internally, the more successful we will see, and the more powerful and the more harmonic, right? The better we will be at resolving these external events in our lives, and showing up to conversations in a way that is truthful, that is vulnerable, where our inner field has already been cleared. All right, so let's just jump over to the macro level, because there is so much chaos happening in our big world, in our outer world right now, and that in particular can feel like so distant, and especially when we're aware of pain and suffering, and especially that there is real pain and suffering that is occurring, and we feel helpless to do anything. And if we are becoming more aware that a lot of, especially what happens on a global stage at a big level, there's so much manipulation and corruption, and so it's very hard to know what is true and what is not, and it can be very tempting to allow ourselves to go into that helpless state, or to assume that we understand what's happening and want to take external action. And instead, my invitation is the same as it is at the micro level in your personal life, which is, as these events come up, bring that sphere of control internally. What does this make me feel? So for example, if I am becoming more aware of a particular abuse of power that is occurring in my country, in our world, just largely, let's say that's what's happening, right? We're recognizing just how pervasive these things are. And instead of feeling helpless, or that, well, it's so far away from me, I don't know what to do, what we can do is bring the sphere of control internally and ask ourselves, what part of my energy, me as an I, in the larger collective, right, in the larger collective consciousness, What part of me has consented to something that would allow abuse of power to occur? Okay, that's the question. And the wound that we want to, the fear or the subconscious, where we want to go into that creative meditation and that inner alchemy again, is addressing what experiences, what is this tied to in my own consciousness, my own conscious evolutionary journey? What part of me consents, right? Wants to please or bow down or is over aggressive. What we have different reactions to these things, so we have to ask ourselves individually, really be honest in our own individual expression of what allows abuse of power to occur. And as we take that sphere of influence within ourselves and we ensure that we, as an individual, I am clearing whatever programs, whatever wounds, whatever things within me that would allow for this type of larger abuse of power to occur. And when I do that, it is ensuring it's one less person. Imagine if all of us were doing this kind of work. If all of us were doing this sort of inner alchemy and this sort of empowerment work, then externally these sorts of things would be much more challenging for abuse of power to occur. And the structures that be start to lose their foundation energetically, and eventually through what we mentally consent to and what we physically consent to, then all of a sudden the power dynamics start to change, because I am no longer allowing myself to participate in an energy that allows this pattern to occur in a larger collective way. Okay, another example would be not having awareness, or being too distracted or too busy to pay attention, right? To care and to understand when there is corruption occurring, or when there is abuse of power occurring. That can, one of our reactions can be a denial state. So what makes us go into that denial state? How can we, taking that sphere of influence back into the self and into those wounds, how can we as an individual examine and release whatever wounding, whatever patterns, whatever things are in the way that allow for these structures to, that allowed for these structures to be built in the first place, and that allow them to continue to do so. And so that is again, and I know this is short and quick. We will continue many of these conversations, and I do offer resources, and we'll actually be starting a bunch of things in January that are related to developing these skills for inner alchemy and inner perception. And on this channel, I continue to put out as much information and skills and practice as I can also. So please, in the comments, let me know what resonates and what resources you feel are necessary, for yourself in order to strengthen your ability to practice this part of inner authority, right? The inner alchemy work and the inner examination through creative meditation, to really understand the subconscious more profoundly on our own. Of course, we can go to a therapist, we can go to a healer, and all of that is wonderful. And when your inner authority guides you to see somebody, then absolutely do that. It is necessary that we have support. But at the same time, we can get better at these skills. And the stronger that we are at these skills in our micro level, the less that these antagonistic forces can actually start to act upon us. They don't have room to get in. And the more that we bring that awareness, the same practices that we're bringing to the individual and to the micro level and our interpersonal relationships and our self-relationship, that we bring that same awareness and those same practices to the macro level at a larger scale, we are empowering ourselves, and little by little we are empowering the collective to move out of these dualistic and power imbalances. Okay, and all of the wonderful things that start to happen once we are dedicated to this sort of work. So I think that's where I'm going to leave it for today. I hope that you found something that was helpful. And if anything, just the reminder that you have more power than you realize when it comes to your outer world. Everything starts with the inner world. So start with the inner world. Take the power back. Come back into, what am I sending? What can I control? What can I release? And the outer world starts to shift accordingly. It just happens. Again, you don't have to take my word for it though. You start practicing and you will see for yourself. All right, more to come soon. Love and strength, everyone. Have a great week.